Good morning, everybody. Who was at Cloud Camp last night? Only a handful. Okay. So it looks like Gareth Rothko did a tremendous presentation last night about some of the operational aspects and especially configuration management around serverless. And so if you were there and you saw that, you're going to see some similar themes coming out in this. A lot of the thinking that I put into this presentation kind of was in preparation for that Cloud Camp. And then I ended up not being able to go, which was a bit of a shame, but I hope you all had fun that did go along. And if you didn't go along, it's a tremendous event. So this presentation also came out of a sort of online discussion that was bouncing backwards and forwards between me and Paul at the back, one of the organizers today. And it's really about what does operations mean in the world of serverless. So we just had a presentation on sort of the dev side of doing serverless, and this is kind of the ops side of doing serverless, so what's involved. So I titled it Less Ops, and then I thought about that and kind of thought maybe that should be apostrophe Less Ops because we've got rid of the server. And then because we're here today for JeffConf, then maybe it should be JeffOps, if we're going to stick with that name. Somebody asked Paul if he'd come up with Jeff because of the stuff that Eddie Izzard does. And that would have been super funny if it was true, but not everything can be so well connected. See, Mr. Monkchips is back in the room. We're running early. You see, it can happen. So, means you can have more coffee. I thought I'd start out kind of giving my definition of what operations is. And it's a set of activities that you need to do so that your code can actually work and so that you can fix your code when it stops working for reasons that you didn't anticipate. All of the slides will be online on SlideShare moments after we're done here as well. So that should be pretty easy. And it'll be SlideShare, CP Swan, same as my Twitter handle. So this is what I came up with, sort of 4 high-level things. Provisioning, you need to get your code into a place where it can run. Config management, you need to do things surrounding your code so that it has kind of right contextual understanding of the environment that it's operating in. So things like the IAM roles or the CloudWatch configuration that was touched upon earlier on is all super important. And that's kind of where I'd point to Gareth's presentation from last night, because he was making the point that you can sort of knock something together in 30 lines of Python and then find yourself doing 100 lines of config management for IAM and CloudWatch just to make it actually do what you expect it to do. And then there's monitoring. So is my service performing the way that I expect it to? Am I getting requests in a timely manner? Where is my 99.9th percentile response time and all of that sort of stuff? And then logging. It's doing some work for me. Things might start to go wrong. How do I find out about that? Curiously, this is one area where serverless is still struggling, especially. So I've seen some case studies where people are saying, yeah, I'm all serverless for my application, but I'm still running an instance for my Elk stack so that I can actually see what my serverless application's doing. And that feels kind of wrong. Another way of thinking about operations is the way that Charity Majors put it. Charity did an amazing talk at the last London Serverless Conf. This is where I should shut up for a moment and let you read what she said, because you can't listen to me and read at the same time. And I'm not going to read out the slide, because that's boring when speakers do that. Hurrah. I read it in that time. Hopefully you could too. So I think Charity's point here is that operations is actually an expression of your culture. If I take my favorite definition of culture as the way we do things around here, then the way you do things around here when you're a software enterprise is your operations culture. It's a huge part of it. So this ops stuff turns out to be kind of important. So Simon's been on ahead of me. And lucky for me, he hasn't ruined too much of what I had to say. So if we think about DevOps and the culture of DevOps that we've all seen grow over the last few years, then one way of thinking about that is the way that Simon talked about it this morning. So it's this set of operational practices that have co-evolved with infrastructure as a service. And if we move into a new paradigm for the compute, we move to serverless from infrastructure as a service, then we can expect a new set of operational practices to co-evolve, and we might end up calling them something different from DevOps. The other thing that might happen here is we might take a definition of DevOps such as Gene Kim's, with his 3 DevOps ways of flow, feedback, and continuous learning by experimentation, and sort of say, well, they came from manufacturing, and in fact, IT, and we all kind of treated ourselves as special snowflakes for so long, turns out to be not so special. We can learn lessons that were learned in the 50s by manufacturing corporations in Japan and just apply them to software. And in some ways, that's what DevOps is. And I think the 3 DevOps ways of flow, feedback, and continuous learning by experimentation are probably just as applicable to serverless operations as they have been to infrastructure as a service operations. So we might keep on just calling it DevOps. We might. So, no ops. There seems to be this kind of thing of, oh, the server's gone away, so I don't have to do ops anymore, so serverless equals no ops. And it's sort of like, that would mean, taking my earlier definition, that I don't have to do any provisioning, I don't have to do any config management, I don't need to monitor my application, and I don't care about the logs. Hands up anybody that thinks you can get away with that. Okay, good. So I think then we can sort of establish in this room at least that there is no such thing as no ops. Serverless hasn't magically stopped us from needing to do operations. So what will happen? Well, kind of synthesizing some of what Simon's had to say and some of what Paul's had to say and some of what many other people have had to say, I think we could start talking about less ops. And this isn't a view of what can happen today. So I think if we look at what is happening today, with your serverless application, you still need to do provisioning. We were just seeing copying zip files around. You still need to do config management. Even if you're using something like the serverless framework, you have to tell it what to configure for you. You still have to do monitoring, and you still have to do logging. But if I project my map into the future a little bit and think about what Amazon and IBM and everybody else could do, then I can start thinking that I could have provisioning as a service. They could actually build additional services into the environment that do provisioning-y stuff for me. That'd be cool. And I could get monitoring as a service, or the monitoring services that are already there could become fit for purpose. And the same could be said for logging. And what that would leave me with would be a heck of a lot more config management to do. So if I go back to Gareth's point that I need 100 lines of config management to support my 30 lines of Python, if I'm doing config management also for my provisioning, monitoring, and logging, then let's just bump that to 200. And if I look at what's actually involved in config management these days, then infrastructure is code. So arguably, I could say that that config management is code, and that I've kind of arrived at this nirvana there of serverless is just add code, mostly config code, not functional code, but it is still code, and that's the thing that won't go away. So maybe, just maybe, if you kind of take a broad view on it, you do actually get no ops, because when all of these things become as a service, then you just add code to your environment and it runs. But I think we could just call this less ops, or maybe apostrophe less ops or DevOps or something like that. But the point here is we're not there yet. And here's our canary in the coal mine. And I bring up the canary because canarying is one of the super important operational practices that emerged from infrastructure as a service. It's been championed by Netflix. They've open sourced some of the stuff that they have in their internal frameworks to do canarying. And Martin Fowler has written it up as being best operational practice to go along with applications that have been developed on infrastructure as a service. But it's just best operational practice, full stop. I've seen people writing that they don't understand how anybody could run an application without doing canarying. And so the question then comes up, how do I do canarying in serverless? And it turns out to be really super hard, on the verge of impossible. And it bends things out of shape, because practically at the moment, with most of the implementations of serverless, the only way of doing canarying is for you to write your own load balancer as a function. And that is kind of verging on insane. Because if you write your own load balancer as a function, and it is the front end of everything that you do, then anything that you get wrong in that load balancer is going to destroy every other piece of code that you are trying to run. It's something that should be in the infrastructure. And I think we can speculate that it's something that will be in the infrastructure. If we look at the people at Amazon at the moment, I kind of can't imagine that if Lambda was written with Adrian Cockcroft on the team, they'd have written it in such a way that it didn't kind of have canarying built in from the beginning. But it doesn't, and it will come. So the point there is, we're not there yet. There's lots of operational practices that co-evolved with infrastructure as a service that at the moment, we're kind of having to reinvent. And people will do crazy bent out of shape stuff, like write their own load balancers as functions in order to use this stuff, but in time it will just be there. So the people in this room are the pioneers that are going to struggle against the lack of that stuff. And the people that are filling the auditoriums about serverless in 5 years' time will be the happy ones that take for granted the fact that the canarying just works. That's it. Thank you very much for listening. I'm happy to take questions at lunch or questions over lunch or whatever.